Welcome to a deep dive into one of the most talked about geopolitical hotspots in the world, Taiwan. We're going to try to untangle the story of this island nation, hopefully sharing with our audience a few interesting but lesser known, yet significant events in the history of Taiwan. We'll dive into Taiwan's history, its incredibly important role in the global tech industry, and how it became a democracy in a region with, let's just say, a different approach to government. It's a story that a lot of people probably only know the surface of.
Once you start peeling back the layers, it's really fascinating how we got to where we are today, right? Like, how did this island, end up at the center of this global power struggle?
So, to set the stage, let's rewind the clock. Okay, where does Taiwan's story even begin?
Well, long before the headlines, you have the Austronesian people who likely migrated from what we now call southern China. Chinese records actually mention Taiwan as far back as 239 AD, when an emperor dispatched an expeditionary force to it.
So, we're talking about a place with a long, rich history. Okay, but how did Taiwan become this strategically important place? Was it always at the heart of international disputes?
Not always. Over the centuries, Taiwan saw its share of rulers. There was a period when it was a Dutch colony from the early to mid-17th century. Then it was part of China's Qing dynasty starting around 1683. But things really started to shift in the late 19th century when Japan entered the scene. They won the First Sino-Japanese War and took control of Taiwan in 1895, when Taiwan and its associated islands, including the Penghu Archipelago, were ceded to Japan by the Treaty of Shimonoseki, marking the beginning of a period that would have a lasting impact on Taiwan's identity.
So this Japanese influence is where we start to see the seeds of the current situation being planted?
Exactly. Japanese rule lasted for 50 years, and during that time, Taiwan underwent significant modernization and development, since Japan's intention was to develop Taiwan into a showpiece model colony. In fact, the presidential office building occupied by Taiwan's president today was actually built by the Japanese and originally served as the office for the Governor General of Taiwan during the Japanese colonial period. But then World War II happened, and Japan was forced to relinquish control of Taiwan. This is where things get really complicated.
Okay, I'm ready for the plot twist. What happened when Japan gave up Taiwan?
Well, technically, the Republic of China, ROC, which was the ruling government in mainland China at the time, was supposed to take over, at least according to the terms discussed in the 1943 Cairo Declaration and repeated in the 1945 Potsdam Declaration. But meanwhile, a civil war was raging in China between the Republic of China and the Communist Party. In 1949, the Communists, led by Mao Zedong, emerged victorious, forcing the ROC government and over 1 million refugees to flee to Taiwan.
So basically, you had two separate entities claiming to be the legitimate China. That's a recipe for tension, right?
Absolutely, and that division is at the heart of the Taiwan issue today. You have the People's Republic of China, PRC, on the mainland, and the Republic of China, which established itself in Taiwan. And to make things even more complicated, for decades, the ROC in Taiwan was actually ruled as a dictatorship under kai-shek, the leader who had fled the mainland. It wasn't until the 1980s that Taiwan began its transition to democracy. They held their first democratic presidential election in 1996, and since then, they've made remarkable progress in building a free and open society.
Okay, that's quite a journey. So we've got this split between mainland China and Taiwan, each with their own claims and identities. But there's this whole thing about the Treaty of San Francisco that really muddies the waters, right?
Yes, the Treaty of San Francisco was signed in 1952 to officially end World War II. And here's where it gets interesting. Japan renounced its claim to Taiwan, but the treaty didn't explicitly say who Taiwan belonged to.
What?
It was basically left in this legal limbo, which has fueled decades of debate and tension.
Hold on. No one actually claimed Taiwan in this treaty? How is that even possible? It's a whole island, not some lost wallet.
It seems crazy, right?
Yeah.
But that's exactly what happened. And to make things even more strange, neither the PRC nor the ROC were invited to the treaty signing. No party identified as China was invited because there was a disagreement between the US and the UK on whether the Republic of China, led by Chiang Kai-shek, or the newly formed People's Republic of China, represented the Chinese people. However, what the treaty did establish was a consensus that the status of Taiwan was temporarily undetermined and would be resolved later in accordance with the principles of peaceful dispute resolution and self-determination, as outlined in the UN Charter.
Was that really the intention of the people who drafted the treaty, to leave Taiwan's status in limbo?
Yes, that appears to be the case. In 1955, U.S. Secretary of State John Dulles, who co-authored the treaty, affirmed that it ceded Taiwan to no one. Japan simply renounced its claim.
It's like they just decided to kick the can down the road and hope the problem would solve itself. So, with all this ambiguity, how did the Korean War factor into the equation? Did that further complicate Taiwan's status?
Oh, it totally did.
Okay.
The Korean War really solidified the divide between mainland China and Taiwan. See, when North Korea, backed by China and the Soviet Union, invaded South Korea, the United States got involved to prevent the spread of communism. Before the Korean War, in late 1949 and early 1950, American officials were almost prepared to let the PRC forces cross the strait and take over Taiwan and Chiang's forces. But with the outbreak of the Korean War in June 1950, the United States sent its 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait to prevent the conflict from spreading south. The appearance of the 7th Fleet forced the Chinese communists to transfer their troops, which were poised for an invasion of Taiwan, to the Korean front. This delayed military conflict in the Taiwan Strait until the U.S. withdrew after the Korean War. The Korean War also firmly allied the U.S. government with the ROC government in Taiwan, essentially drawing a line in the water, saying Taiwan was off limits. In many ways, the Korean War saved Taiwan and the Chiang regime from being taken over by Communist China.
Wow. So Taiwan became this pawn in the global chess game between superpowers. It's amazing how these historical events ripple through time and shape the world we live in today.
Absolutely. And that tension hasn't really gone away. Fast forward to 1971, and you have another pivotal moment, the UN Resolution 2758, which has again emerged as a hot topic in recent years.
This is the resolution recognizing the People's Republic of China as the sole representative of China in the UN, effectively taking over the Permanent Security Council seat and UN membership held by the Republic of China. So does that mean the international community officially acknowledged that Taiwan was part of China?
Well, it's not that simple. While the resolution did give the PRC the China seat in the UN, the wording specifically referred to removing the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek rather than explicitly mentioning the ROC or Taiwan.
It's kind of like they left a little bit of wiggle room. So the one China policy isn't as black and white as it's often portrayed or understood by some people.
Exactly. And then you have the United States, right? Which adds another layer of complexity. The U.S. officially recognizes the PRC as the sole legal government of China, including acknowledging the Chinese position that Taiwan is a part of China. But it's a carefully worded dance, avoiding any definitive statement on whether or not they actually agree with China's claim. And time after time, the U.S. has put out statements that fall short of recognizing the PRC's sovereignty over Taiwan, while at the same time repeating the position that the U.S. does not support Taiwan independence.
It sounds like everyone's tiptoeing around this issue, trying not to set off any alarms. But China's interest in Taiwan goes beyond just historical claims, right?
There are definitely some serious practical reasons why they want control of this island.
You hit the nail on the head. Let's talk about the Taiwan Strait. This isn't just some random body of water, it's a vital shipping route for global trade, right?
It certainly is. Almost half of the world's container ships and a whopping 88% of the largest cargo vessels pass through this strait every year.
Wow, those are staggering numbers. It's like the aorta of global trade.
It really is. And think about what would happen if that artery were to get clogged. The economic repercussions would be felt worldwide. Supply chains would be disrupted, industries that rely on those goods would grind to a halt, and the cost of everything would skyrocket.
And then there's the elephant in the room, Taiwan's semiconductor industry, right?
Exactly. They're a global powerhouse when it comes to these tiny chips that power everything from smartphones to fighter jets. And that's another major reason why Taiwan is so important to China.
I can imagine the leverage China would have if they controlled the majority of the world's semiconductor production. It would give them a chokehold on the global tech industry.
And a massive advantage in developing advanced technologies, including military applications. It's like having the keys to the kingdom of the digital age.
And beyond economics, there's a significant geopolitical dimension to Taiwan's location.
That's correct. The island basically sits smack dab in the middle of what's called the First Island Chain, a string of islands stretching from Japan down to the Philippines. This chain acts like a strategic barrier containing China's naval power within the East and South China Seas.
So, if China were to control Taiwan, they'd basically break through that chain, giving them greater access to the Pacific Ocean and potentially challenging U.S. dominance in the region.
You got it. It would be a major power shift. And don't forget the domestic political angle. Xi Jinping's ability to secure a third term in office was in part due to his promise to bring Taiwan under PRC control. It would be a key achievement for any Chinese leader, a way to solidify their legacy and demonstrate their strength. So we've got economics, geopolitics, and even internal political calculations all wrapped up in this one issue.
But for all intents and purposes, Taiwan operates as an independent nation, right? From my research, they have their own government, military, currency, even their own vibrant democracy. They check all the boxes for what defines a country?
They do. In fact, Taiwan technically fulfills all the criteria for statehood, according to the Montevideo Convention, a treaty that's widely accepted as defining what makes a state a state. Taiwan has a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states.
So why isn't Taiwan officially recognized as an independent country? What's the catch?
Well, the elephant in the room is China, right? They've made it very clear that they consider any move towards formal independence a red line, something they'd be willing to use military force to prevent. And no one wants to see that happen.
It's like Taiwan is stuck in this geopolitical purgatory, functioning as a sovereign nation, but lacking the formal recognition that would give them a seat at the table on the world stage.
Right. And then there's the whole issue of gaining membership in international organizations, especially the United Nations. Since China holds veto power on the UN Security Council, they can block any attempt by Taiwan to join. It's a catch-22. Taiwan needs international recognition to enhance its security, but the fear of China's reaction makes it incredibly difficult to get that recognition.
So what's the mood on the ground in Taiwan? Are people resigned to this uncertain status quo, or is there a growing desire for something more?
There's definitely a shift happening in Taiwan.
Okay.
Data from the Election Studies Center at National Chengchi University shows a growing trend towards supporting either formal independence or maintaining the status quo, essentially rejecting the idea of unification with mainland China.
So fewer people in Taiwan see their future tied to mainland China. What's driving that sentiment?
Well, for one, China's actions in Hong Kong have been a wake-up call for many in Taiwan. They see how Beijing has tightened its control over Hong Kong, eroding its autonomy and freedoms, and they worry that the same thing could happen to them.
It's like watching a cautionary tale unfold in real time.
Exactly. And the latest polls show just how much public opinion has shifted. A whopping 88% of Taiwanese now favor either formal independence or maintaining the status quo.
Wow.
While strong support for reunification with the mainland has dwindled to a mere 1%. That's a pretty dramatic change from just a few years ago.
Wow, those numbers speak volumes. It seems like Taiwan's own people are increasingly embracing their separate identity. And speaking of embracing their identity, there's this story about Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te challenging China's historical claims that I found really interesting. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. President Lai basically called out what he sees as hypocrisy in China's arguments for reunification. He pointed to the 1858 Treaty of Agen, where China ceded a massive chunk of territory to Russia, something like 15 to 20 times larger than Taiwan.
So he's basically saying, if China is so concerned about historical territories and achieving territorial integrity, why aren't they demanding Russia return that land?
Exactly. It's a clever way to highlight the inconsistencies in China's narrative and to emphasize that Taiwan's situation is unique.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. But here's the million-dollar question. What does the future hold for Taiwan? Is there a path toward a peaceful resolution, or are we on a collision course with conflict?
That's the question everyone's grappling with, and there are no easy answers. The situation is incredibly complex, with so many moving parts and so much at stake. On the one hand, Taiwan is a thriving democracy with a strong sense of its own identity, and its people deserve the right to determine their own future.
Right.
On the other hand, China's determined to assert its claim, and they have the economic and military might to back it up.
So where does that leave us? Can the international community prevent a potential crisis in this region?
That's where things get even trickier. There's a real balancing act going on. Countries want to support Taiwan, but they also don't want to provoke China, walking that tightrope between upholding democratic values and avoiding a conflict that could have global repercussions.
So if Taiwan already operates as an independent nation in all but name, what would it take for it to gain wider international recognition and formal independence? Could that actually help de-escalate the situation?
That's a key question. Right now, only a handful of countries formally recognize Taiwan, right? But some argue that if more countries, especially major powers, were to officially acknowledge Taiwan's independence, it could send a strong message to China and potentially deter them from taking aggressive action. It's like saying, "We see you, Taiwan, and we're standing with you."
Exactly, but it's a move that comes with huge risks.
Yes, China has made it very clear that they view formal independence for Taiwan as a red line, and any move in that direction could trigger a military response.
So it's a high-stakes gamble.
But is it a gamble worth taking? That's the debate that's raging right now in diplomatic circles. Some say it's the only way to safeguard Taiwan's future and prevent a potential war. Others argue that it would only inflame tensions and make a conflict more likely. There are no easy answers, and the consequences of getting it wrong are enormous.
So, much like its intricate history over the centuries, Taiwan's future seems destined to be shaped by the strategies and decisions of global powers.
Well said. Unfortunately, that might be the case.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. If Taiwan already operates as a de facto independent nation, what would it take for it to gain broader international recognition and de jure independence? It's a question that will continue to shape global politics for years to come, and one that we encourage our audience to continue exploring. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of Taiwan's uncertain status.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found it valuable. If you did, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps us reach more amazing listeners like you. Thanks again for your support, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye for now.